So here we have the longer discourse on the mass of suffering, Mahadukkhakkhandha Sutta. It sounds a bit grim, but actually this is a really profound and very, very helpful sutta for us. And like all the suttas, like all the teachings of the Buddha, you know, it's always applicable, always relevant, timeless Dharma. So let's begin. So have I heard. At one time, the Buddha was staying near Savatthi at Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's monastery. Then several mendicants robed up in the morning and, taking their bowls and robes, entered Savatthi for alms. Then it occurred to them, it's too early to wander for alms in Savatthi. Why don't we go to the monastery of the wanderers who follow other paths? Then they went to the monastery of the wanderers who follow other paths and exchanged greetings with the wanderers there. When the greetings and polite conversation were over, they sat down to one side. The wanderers said to them, Reverends, the ascetic Gautama advocates the complete understanding of sensual pleasures, and so do we. The ascetic Gautama advocates the complete understanding of sights, and so do we. The ascetic Gautama advocates the complete understanding of feelings, and so do we. What then is the difference between the ascetic Gautama's teaching and instruction and ours? Those mendicants neither approved nor dismissed that statement of the wanderers who follow other paths. They got up from their seat thinking, we'll learn the meaning of this statement from the Buddha himself. So we'll have a little pause here. It's a very, in a way, typical start to a sutta. In a way, it gives us a glimpse, doesn't it, into the life of the monks and nuns at the time of the Buddha. It's not so very different from today, particularly in the Theravadan tradition, where we follow very closely the original teachings of the Buddha. So the monks get up, do their various probably meditation practices, maybe some chores, put on their robes and go and get the alms food. And oftentimes they would go out on alms round, as we do today sometimes, and other times they would have a meal organised in someone's home or maybe even in the monastery. And on this occasion, the monks are setting off on an alms round. And as we often hear in the suttas, they have a little bit of extra time. So they go to visit some other spiritual practitioners. And as we know, at the time of the Buddha, there were many different schools of spiritual practices, many different traditions. There was a lot of spiritual practitioners who had renounced the world, not just in the Buddha's community of monks and nuns, but also in other communities. So a very rich kind of melting pot of spiritual exploration, discussion, debate. And on many occasions, we hear about people coming to debate with the Buddha, sometimes hoping to defeat the Buddha in debate. Unfortunate for them, because that never actually happened, but the Buddha was able to really help and clarify and put straight all the different kinds of views that people brought to him. And so on this occasion, the monks go to the group of wanderers from another tradition, and they don't know how to respond to this interesting point that's made that, well, our teachings that we follow are the same as the teachings that you follow. What's the difference? So let's see what more we can hear about what the difference may be. So the difference, what is the difference between their understanding of sensual pleasures, of sights and of feelings, and the understanding in the Buddha's teaching? So perhaps the mendicants, the monks, bhikkhus didn't know what the difference was. They go back to ask the Buddha. So after the meal, when they returned from alms round, they went up to the Buddha, bowed, sat down at one side, and told him what had happened. And there's a repetition you can see in the Pali here. They go through the whole thing, word by word, giving him a very precise recount of the conversation. And then, mendicants, the Buddha said, when wanderers who follow other paths say this, you should say to them, but, reverends, what is the gratification, the drawback, and the escape when it comes to sensual pleasures? What is the gratification, the drawback, and the escape when it comes to sights? What is the gratification, the drawback, and the escape when it comes to feelings? Questioned like this, the wanderers who follow other paths would be stumped, and in addition would get frustrated. Why is that? Because they're out of their element. I don't see anyone in this world with its gods, Maras and Brahmas, this population with its ascetics and Brahmins, its gods and humans, who could provide a satisfying answer to these questions, except for the realized one or his disciple, or someone who has heard it from them. So this is very interesting. This teaching of the Buddha, then, that he's brought in, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in relation to sense pleasures, in relation to sights, and in relation to feelings. Let's continue. The Buddha goes on. And what is the gratification of sensual pleasures? There are these 5 kinds of sensual stimulation. What 5? Sights known by the eye that are likable, desirable, agreeable, pleasant, sensual, and arousing. Sounds known by the ear, smells known by the nose, tastes known by the tongue, touches known by the body that are likable, desirable, agreeable, pleasant, sensual, and arousing. These are the 5 kinds of sensual stimulation. The pleasure and happiness that arise from these 5 kinds of sensual stimulation, this is the gratification of sensual pleasures. And what is the drawback of sensual pleasures? It's when a person earns a living by means such as computing, accounting, calculating, farming, trade, raising cattle, archery, government service, or one of the professions. But they must face cold and heat, being hurt by the touch of flies, mosquitoes, wind, sun, and reptiles, and risking death from hunger and thirst. This is a drawback of sensual pleasures, apparent in this very life, a mass of suffering caused by sensual pleasures. Now that person might try hard, strive, and make an effort, but fail to earn any money. If this happens, they sorrow and wail and lament, beating their breast and falling into confusion, saying, "Oh, my hard work is wasted, my efforts are fruitless." This too is a drawback of sensual pleasures apparent in this very life, a mass of suffering caused by sensual pleasures. So we've heard about the gratification of sensual pleasures, which is relatable, isn't it? All the pleasant aspects of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. And now we're beginning to explore the dangers, the drawbacks. And it's really, of course, a timeless Dharma. It's very relevant, isn't it, for us to hear about the obvious kind of unpleasant sensory experiences that we can have on a day-to-day basis, the wind, the mosquitoes, the sun, and so forth. And then also we're beginning to look at kind of broader range of suffering from, not being able to live comfortably due to poverty or due to limited circumstances.
The wanderers, were these other Buddhist schools? Because I'm not sure what the timeline is like here. Or are these like other religions that they're talking about, this monastery that they go to?
I think it's actually sort of non-Buddhist practitioners. There were all sorts of very interesting strands of religious practice and thought in the time of the Buddha. There was a very large community of Jains. Jainism was one of the religions, and there's lots of meetings between the Buddha and various Jain practitioners. Actually, the teachings are very similar for the Jains. They also practiced harmlessness to a great degree, but they didn't have the full kind of teachings of the Buddha on anicca, anatta, dukkha. And then there were all sorts of other teachers at the time of the Buddha, with all sorts of very interesting belief systems. And actually you can find out about them through looking at the suttas. There's one sutta particularly that's very interesting, which gives all the different possible views that one can have in terms of the past, the future, and spiritual practice, and that's called Brahmajala Sutta, Digha Nikaya number 2. It's called The Net of Views, is the translation of its title. And it's really interesting because it actually sort of covers every possible kind of perspective one could have. And in this sutta, the Buddha is essentially saying all of these views are to be let go of. They're not liberating. They don't really lead us forward. So it's very interesting to consider that. The understanding of the wanderers in relation to sensual pleasures, in relation to sights, and in relation to feelings would have related to their meditation practice. So the idea in the commentary is that the sense pleasures they would have related to, from the perspective of jhana practitioners, they would have been able to kind of, in a way, turn away from sense pleasures and understand sense pleasures through their meditation practice of letting go of the body. And sights, the wanderers may have had a meditation practice where they had experienced higher jhana, where the sense realm was no longer kind of enticing them. They were no longer identifying with that. So again, a very developed practice of turning away from sights. And in relation to feelings, again, the higher states of meditation, the higher stages of focused, concentrated, one-pointed mindfulness, they would have, again, in relation to feelings, they would be very detached from feelings. They would have seen beyond them. And so in this way, they would have had a lot in common with the disciples of the Buddha. But the Buddha's disciples, or the Buddha's teaching rather, is very practical and down to earth and relating to our everyday experience and the development of wisdom through our day-to-day practice. And this is something that many of the wanderers would not relate to because they were much more involved in, you could say, samadhi practice, but not so much in insight practice. So this is a very helpful pointer from the commentary.
It seems like he's saying the danger of sensual pleasures is earning a living, like the difficulty that can happen when you earn a living. And that's funny because in terms of, I mean, I can definitely understand that. And partly I've been very fortunate, but earning a living for me is kind of positive. I wouldn't say it brings me down. It doesn't take away my energy. So that's what
Yeah.
just seems curious to me.
I guess we could say, educated, affluent, in a wealthy societies, we have the luxury of kind of often having work that we enjoy, that we've chosen, that we're well remunerated for. How wonderful is that? You could say that's one of the gratifications. That would fall on the gratification side, I guess, Karuna. But in this instance, I guess it's what we're really hearing is, for a lot of people, they work hard. They don't necessarily choose what they have to do. They just do what they can, and they don't get paid very well. So they're still struggling and suffering. Oh, yeah, that is a drawback. I consider it in terms of like the drawback of having a body, the drawback of living in the sense realm. There are the pleasures and then there are the pains, So this is an example for us of how, livelihood can be deeply unsatisfying and unrewarding, I guess. It's hard for us to relate to, isn't it, Corinna? Because it's, as you say, it's not necessarily the case. It's not within our experience of this lifetime.
Yeah, thank you, Aya. Yeah, I can certainly understand that, and it depends very much on your social class, or but even, let's say, even if you are well off, there's still like work-life balance issues. So it's like the stresses aren't the burning heat of the sun, but just the not being able to separate your job from your personal life, or other different kind of stresses.
Yeah, look, that's really helpful you bring that in, because we may have much more easeful conditions, but there are still areas where we can point to and say, actually this is suffering. If things are going smoothly and easily and we're getting everything we need and want, it can be quite difficult to really open to the truths of the Buddha's teaching. The first noble truth there is suffering. To be honest, when I started practicing, I just didn't get that at all for years, because I felt like, well, I'm not suffering, I'm having a great time. And one could say, well, that's nice. But on the other hand, when we're struggling and when things are very difficult, we certainly have a great opportunity to, it's like a doorway. It's open for us. The spiritual path is open because we can see very clearly the drawbacks of the sense realm. We're not duped, we're not fooled, we're not taken in. And so that there is, I'm not saying it's good to be struggling, but rather that one can take the situation, a struggle, and we can open to the practice very fully and really reap the benefits of the Buddha's teachings. When there's struggle, there's much more of an imperative, right, to move in a spiritual direction. That person might try hard, strive, and make an effort and succeed in earning money, but they experience pain and sadness when they try to protect it, thinking, how can I prevent my wealth from being taken by rulers or bandits, consumed by fire, swept away by flood, or taken by unloved heirs? And even though they protect it and ward it, rulers or bandits do take it, or fire consumes it, or flood sweeps it away, or unloved heirs take it. They sorrow and wail and lament, beating their breast and falling into confusion. What used to be mine is gone. This too is a drawback of sensual pleasures, apparent in this very life, a mass of suffering caused by sensual pleasures. So I find this quite powerful for us in this time of climate emergency, with fires and floods. Actually we're witnessing, aren't we, these kinds of devastating, catastrophic events happening for people around the world, kind of unpredictably. You know, we don't know when it's going to be our turn. And so it is quite a powerful consideration. And it's interesting, isn't it? So we were talking about the haves and the have-nots in a way, those who are fortunate with their work and income and status, and those who are not. And so look at that. Even, okay, those who have the haves, we also, you know, can worry about losing what we have. And isn't it the case that we do? And we have to get insurances, and we have to have social, what is it, pensions and things like that. And we're you know, concerned about our future and concerned about what might happen. And so almost in a way, as the saying goes, the more you have, the more you have to lose, the more you have to worry about. So in this scenario, there's no winners in this way of looking at reality. So this is helpful, isn't it? This is sobering. But we can appreciate the truth of what the Buddha is saying here, what he's pointing to. Would anybody like to come in at this point with any comments, questions, reflections?
One of the things I was noticing is there's a lot of repetition. And so I was thinking, okay, so maybe that's because it helps memorization. It's a non-written text, things like that. The other thing that I was wondering though is then, okay, the enumerations, you know, like when it says, you know, this person, then this person, you know, like the laborer, the computer, this person, that person. So I was wondering if, like, going through everybody or going through the classes of types of people, is that like to say this is the order of things, or is it to say that regardless of who you are, this phenomena is all encompassing? Like, what's that repeating stuff in the, you know,
Yeah,
going through everybody?
Thank you very much, Julie. Yeah, it's a really good observation. First of all, to talk about the repeating. How true, yes. It's an oral tradition. So originally the suttas were transmitted by, you know, memorization. And we do have a lot of repetition. And it's quite interesting, you know, when we start looking at the teachings, there's a kind of style. And, you know, it can take a little bit of getting used to. But it's definitely worth persevering, because if we read, you know, a lot of suttas, it becomes very fascinating actually to compare suttas and to tease out, you know, what's the really significant teaching here. And this becomes more and more easeful as we study the suttas and, you know, just keep taking them in, not to be put off by the style. Actually consider also this, that this is a very ancient teaching that goes back nearly 2,600 years. How awesome is that? That it's still something we can relate to and have conversations about today and learn from and take direction on the path from. It's really quite remarkable. So please don't be put off. Keep coming back for more. And yeah, I do agree with you that actually I think that the Buddha here is pointing to the fact that whether you're considered a fortunate person in worldly terms or an unfortunate person, this truth, this reality of the gratification that's possible with sense desires, and then the drawback of sense pleasures, this applies to one and all. This is a universal teaching. And the beauty of a lot of the teachings of the Buddha is that they apply to one and all. They are universal teachings. And we can, you know, not take that as a gospel truth or anything, consider it for ourselves, check it out, which also the Buddha encouraged us to do with all of his teachings. Check it out for ourselves and see, does this really apply to me? Does it apply to everyone around me? And oftentimes we can find, well, yes, yep, this seems to be you know, a bit like the laws of physics. In fact, perhaps a bit more certain than the laws of physics. Our understanding of those does sort of change over time. These teachings are quite timeless. But let's see. Always with a sense of investigating and trying to pull the teachings apart, and a skeptical mind. Very helpful. Furthermore, for the sake of sensual pleasures, kings fight with kings, aristocrats fight with aristocrats, Brahmins fight with Brahmins, and householders fight with householders. A mother fights with her child, child with mother, father with child, and child with father. Brother fights with brother, brother with sister, sister with brother, and friend fights with friend. Once they've started quarreling, arguing, and disputing, they attack each other with fists, stones, rods, and swords, resulting in death and deadly pain. This too is a drawback of sensual pleasures, apparent in this very life, a mass of suffering caused by sensual pleasures. Furthermore, for the sake of sensual pleasures, they don their sword and shield, fasten their bow and arrows, and plunge into a battle massed on both sides, with arrows and spears flying and swords flashing. There they're struck with arrows and spears, and their heads are chopped off, resulting in death and deadly pain. This too is a drawback of sensual pleasures, apparent in this very life, a mass of suffering caused by sensual pleasures. Furthermore, for the sake of sensual pleasures, they don their sword and shield, fasten their bows and arrows, and charge wetly plastered bastions with arrows and spears flying and swords flashing. There they are struck with arrows and spears, splashed with dung, crushed with spiked blocks, and their heads are chopped off, resulting in death and deadly pain. This too is a drawback of sensual pleasures, apparent in this very life, a mass of suffering caused by sensual pleasures. Furthermore, for the sake of sensual pleasures, they break into houses, plunder wealth, steal from isolated buildings, commit highway robbery, and commit adultery. The rulers would arrest them and subject them to various punishments: whipping, caning, and clubbing, cutting off hands or feet, or both, cutting off ears or nose, or both, the porridge pot, the shell shave, the demon's mouth, the garland of fire, the burning hand, the grass blades, the bark dress, the antelope, the meat hook, the coins, the caustic pickle, the twisting bar, the straw mat, being splashed with hot oil, being fed to the dogs, being impaled alive, and being beheaded. These result in death and deadly pain. This too is a drawback of sensual pleasures, apparent in this very life, a mass of suffering caused by sensual pleasures. So the Buddha doesn't really hold back. It's quite a list. And, you know, one can read in the commentary the graphic description of all these different kinds of punishment that were de rigueur in the day, all sorts of ways of torturing the body. So, you know, it's really quite painful to take in this description. And yet, you know, in a strange way, it's, you know, nothing that we don't already have some kind of familiarity with, just from watching the news. So when the Buddha says, you know, this is what happens, this is how it is for us, at the time of the Buddha, that's how it was, and we can see how it's still the case. And it's interesting to me that, you know, one can have ideas about human progress and evolution. And one can either look at it in a positive way or in a less positive way. But I think the important teaching really from the Buddha is that this realm, sense realm of pleasure and pain, is kind of almost inevitably going to be a place of both delight and also a place of suffering. And it kind of behooves us to, do the spiritual work that will release us from this whole mass of suffering. And it's not to say that there's no such thing as progress, but it's just that we do get the sense, I think, reading this sutta, that there's more of a sense of a circular, isn't there, or like a spiral of development, certainly not a straight line. And still today, the same kinds of terrible suffering are happening all around us. So very sobering. But, the Buddha's teachings are always pointing to the truth. And for this, there's a sense of, can't dispute that. Furthermore, for the sake of sensual pleasures, they conduct themselves badly by way of body, speech, and mind. When their body breaks up after death, they're reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, the underworld, hell. This is a drawback of sensual pleasures, to do with lives to come, a mass of suffering caused by sensual pleasures. So there, just to pause for a moment, that is the full kind of spectrum on the drawbacks of sensual pleasures. So if we get caught up in sensual pleasures, what the Buddha is really pointing to is that what is pleasant for us can be a cause of tremendous, attachment. So much so that we will fight for what we want to keep. The comforts that we've become used to, we will fight to maintain that degree of comfort, and steal from others to get what we want, to get the hit of pleasure. So it's quite, I would say, relatable and painful reality for us, this human condition, and that sense pleasures can lead us astray, lead us into harm that then not only creates problems in the here and now, but for our future, takes us down. So, okay, that is the entire teaching on this particular topic of the drawbacks of sense desires.
When I hear the word pleasure, I think it connotates like indulgence. But, there's certainly that, but there's also just like a very basic aspect of being a human being that, we need to eat, we need a shelter, that just basic requirements that we also kind of we have to strive for in the lay world. And for me, those don't, it seems very different than like sense pleasure. It almost seems like sense maintenance.
Yeah.
or maintenance of life. So just how that, while being attached to sense pleasures is one thing, and then just maintaining my life is another thing.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. It's not necessarily that we're greedy, right? Or that I actually said we're seeking comfort. Well, it's often more like seeking to survive is really what you're pointing to, isn't it? And people nowadays perhaps fighting over simple things like water, essentials, food, somewhere to live. And so it can come down to this, where one can feel, well, we really have very little choice. One can either, lie down and die or struggle. And how difficult when there's a limit of resources and one has to struggle with other beings in order to get what one needs. And we can just, consider that. It's not like, in a way, there would be perhaps less of a sense of harming or hurting others intentionally, more like just trying to survive. But we can see again, this is a real drawback of the sense realm for us, that we have hunger, we have thirst, we have all these needs, don't we? The body requires so much to maintain itself, and we have to seek those things. Yeah, it's really poignant. I think here the Buddha is giving us a very full picture of all the suffering that's inherent in this realm, and just for us to contemplate, just to consider that however wonderful our situation may be, even so, this realm is also a realm of great potential for suffering. If we're not suffering now, there's a chance suffering it's kind of lurking around every corner. We just don't know what's coming next. And just this much, let us consider this, and let it be not a source of despair or, turning away from life, not at all, more like a source of encouragement and to bring up a sense of urgency. Life is short. We don't know how long we've got. We don't know what might happen. Let's make the most of the opportunity we have right now to develop on the path, to practice mindfulness, to live a virtuous life and to cultivate the Eightfold Path. I think this is really, for me, what this teaching is pointing to. But let's continue. We're going to learn now about the third aspect of this teaching. So we've had the gratification of sense desire. Yes, there's a lot of pleasure to be had through seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. And yes, there are drawbacks. There's all kinds of suffering, which we've just heard about from the Buddha, that are also part of the picture, that are to be considered. And now let's hear about the escape in terms of sense desires. Okay, and what is the escape from sensual pleasures? Removing and giving up desire and greed for sensual pleasures. This is the escape from sensual pleasures. There are ascetics and Brahmins who don't truly understand sensual pleasures, gratification, drawback, and escape in this way for what they are. It's impossible for them to completely understand sensual pleasures themselves, or to instruct another so that practicing accordingly, they will completely understand sensual pleasures. There are ascetics and Brahmins who don't truly understand sensual pleasures, gratification, drawback, and escape in this way for what they are. It is possible for them to completely understand sensual pleasures themselves, or to instruct another so that practicing accordingly, they will completely understand sensual pleasures. So this is the end of this section. So basically, there's small passage about the escape from sensual pleasures. It's very pithy, very brief. Simply removing and giving up desire and greed for sensual pleasures. So, the Buddha's not actually going into how we're able to do this in this particular sutta. But I think we were even sort of touching on that just before we read this short passage. And the Buddha also goes on to say here that there are those who understand this teaching on the gratification, the drawbacks or the dangers, and the escape from sensual pleasures. And there are those who don't understand. And I think what the Buddha is pointing to here is that in his teaching, one can come to a full understanding of these aspects. And without fully comprehending the Dharma, it's difficult to really fully grasp the pleasures, the drawbacks, and the escape from sense pleasures. The benefits of renunciation cannot be overstated. The Buddha, when he speaks of right intention, a very important aspect of right intention is the intention of renunciation, letting go, giving things up. So if we feel our practice is becoming a bit stale and we're not really making a lot of progress, just give up something that you enjoy. Give up your coffee, give up your tea, give up your TV, whatever, something that you enjoy and relish and delight in. Just stop it, just stop. And then you can watch the mind and see. And there, right there, you'll get to see sense desire. And just breathe it in, breathe it out, sit with it. And this is a great way to encourage our practice, just to give things up and to allow ourselves to let go, die before you die, give it up before you lose it. And so renunciation, giving things up, in every religious tradition, this is encouraged actually. Look at Lent for the Christians, look at Ramadan for the Muslims, giving things up, struggling with the lack of, and in this way we can really catalyze our practice. However difficult a time we think we're having, always be ready to give something else up. Even in monastic life, one of my teachers, Ajahn Sucitto, he's the abbot of a monastery in the UK where I lived for some time, and he would encourage us to give up more. There's always more to give up. Even we've given up all our money, our livelihoods, our choices, our freedom, etc., as monastics. Well, there's always more. See what we're attracted to right now. See what you're attached to right now, and just try putting it aside, or even just delaying the gratification for a while. And then we can really sharpen up our practice. This is really worth doing.
What helps me is to reflect on that I don't own anything. Everything is just here for me to borrow for my time on this earth plane. So that helps for me to loosen that grasping. It's okay to have preferences. Sure, we would prefer the sunshine over the rain or whatever. So preferences are okay. But for me, it's that degree of clinging to needing my preference, and something that you had said when you spending your time in Canada here with us, you said something along the lines of something not given is lost. And that really helps me to loosen my clenching. Something not given freely is going to be lost anyway, because I'm only here to borrow the things in my life and then pass them on. Thank you.
Yeah, we're just passing through, and all that is not given is lost. And it's a great encouragement, this beautiful teaching from an Indian sage whose name I can't remember. But what a great encouragement to be willing to let go, and also to be willing to give it away. It doesn't mean to give everything away, so we have nothing for ourselves, of course, but to give what we can, to take what we need, be frugal in our ways, an encouragement from the Buddha, and to practice generosity, to practice dana, dana, sila, bhavana. These are the three sort of legs of the tripod, crucial aspects of the path: giving, goodness, and practice for liberation.